Welcome, everybody, to the Ripple Intent Podcast. I'm Kyle, and Jon is here. We are here once again to explore one of the topics that we've talked about in our breakfast clubs. With us today is our guest, Juan Ramos. Ron, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks for having me, Kyle and Jon. I'm Juan Ramos. I'm an architect and principal at Boulder Associates. I've been with Boulder Associates for about 17 years now, and in architecture for about 20, and excited to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks, Juan. Jon, you're quiet. Say hello.
Hey, Juan, we're super excited to have you. And we know that today's topic is one of your favorites because it's one of ours as well. So for all of our listeners, we're actually going to talk about mistakes today. So this truly is, one of the areas we love to live because it's so painful. Nobody likes making mistakes, but we make them all the time. So when we came up with this topic, there were a couple of things that fed into it from a few different directions. For me, this really actually resulted from a conversation that I had with a team in our office. So we asked some team members to share things about work that drains them. And all of the senior folks, myself included, ranked mistakes very high on their list. So this is really a pain point because our roles are very external facing with our clients. And that, to me, just makes the mistakes harder. So when I then looked at our junior teammates, I became really concerned how those statements would impact their work product and our overall team culture. So we really should take their perspective into account. So it's not realistic that we can expect we're going to work in an environment where no mistakes are ever made. We realized that this actually needed to become a conversation across the entire team as to how mistakes play into our work from a perspective of how to minimize them, but B, to understand how they impact everyone. Right? And how will this really impact our work relationships? So this just generated a series of conversations, which for me informed the basis of this breakfast club.
Yeah, and our timing was pretty funny because we were chatting about this, and I'm coming off a couple days at work where I'm watching one person. So there's a mistake, and her inclination was, I've got to fix this right away. I've got to make it go away. I can't even have it hang out there. We have to solve the problem right now. And the reason that came to light was because someone else called me and said, she wants to have another meeting. I don't have this many meetings planned, right? So obviously the root of it was they found a mistake in a project, her project. She has to make the mistake go away. We can't let it hang out there. So we got an immediate reaction, pull everyone together and fix it. And I got somebody else who is kind of going on and on. And it was almost like droning. Right. We're on this call and the mistake came to light, and the person who is being impacted by it got pretty upset. And the person who made the mistake starts going, I should have done better. I should have done this 6 months ago. Right. And like, okay, yeah, interesting. I don't disagree, but you sound like you're pretty upset about it. Well, then a couple of meetings later, he's reflecting on and sharing that exact experience. Well, I just did this thing in this other meeting on this other project, and now all of a sudden, I should have done better. I should have done it 6 months ago. I was like, well, none of these people have any context to what you're talking about, but he's carrying it with him, right? It's like, I got to go around and tell everybody I screwed up, and I know what I should have done different. And for whatever reason, right? It's almost like, hey, I want everyone to still think I'm a good person, even though I made this mistake, because I recognize what I did and I'm acknowledging it. I'm telling everybody it. And it's almost like, I don't know, is that actually helpful? And so when we were talking, Jon, it was just like, there's a much bigger conversation here, right? Just watching how different people react, how different people incorporate, and then of course, how people process it. It was just so fascinating. And so it turned into a very large conversation and turned into one of our breakfast club conversations, which you actually led one.
Yes, I remember sort of when I was thinking about that breakfast club and what it meant to sort of lead that, I thought of two things and mistakes came into my mind immediately. And one was really a long time ago, I had a project manager do a great job of sort of acknowledging and teeing up a mistake in a way that was so clear and concise, but so professional that it just 15 years later, it's still hanging out with me. He stayed after an owner's meeting and asked, it was owner's rep, and he asked the architect, the engineer, the contractor, including the superintendent, to stay after the meeting. It was very unusual. And he said, okay, everyone else can leave. And I thought we were going to get taken out to the woodshed. And instead he says, hey, I walked the site yesterday, and there's supposed to be these dialysis wall boxes in the patient rooms, and they're not there. And they just finished installing the flooring and put in some casework. I said, so architect, you got to figure out your plan. I want you to have a sketch and a design to reconcile this by Thursday. It was like a Tuesday. And contractor, I need your critical path schedule to get this fixed by Friday. And I don't really care about the cost right now or pointing fingers. Let's just acknowledge the mistake and let's figure out how to get it solved quickly. And I was brilliant. I mean, he took what could have been a finger pointing session and turned it into a how do we solve a problem and acknowledge it quickly and move on. And it was, to this day, it sticks with me.
Yeah, it's a great example of almost calmness in crisis, right? Mm-hmm. Where we hope that people don't react and get not that they don't react in a way that gets everybody upset. In this case, what you describe, it was much more calm, motivating, direction giving, right? Took charge, and here's what we're gonna do in the short term. This is where I need you to focus your efforts.
His leadership was just completely appropriate for the moment, and we solved it quickly. And then we resolved the sort of the financial piece and the sort of the post-mortem later. It wasn't necessary at the moment, and he had the right tone and the right requests at the right time.
Yep. So some of our examples, right? We're sharing how other people react when we see mistakes. I want to focus our conversation for a few minutes on when we see other people make mistakes. How do other people react? Most of us don't work in isolation. A lot of us work around other people or our work products, whatever those may be. They influence or impact directly other people, right? Other people are either waiting for us, or we're a step in the process, or we're a contributor to a larger process, right? So when we see the people that we work alongside or work with make mistakes, how do other people most often react?
Yeah, I mean, others, you can see a pretty wide spectrum, but it is very common to see, finger pointing or a here we go again attitude. Sometimes you see, I love it when I see this empathy, right? Somebody feels bad, I'm sorry, you made a mistake. Those things always percolate, and I find them fascinating to see what happens in the team. But when it happens over and over again, you can see how things can kind of bubble up when mistakes are repeated, or there is sometimes even a fear of making those mistakes. And so people will put their head in the sand and sort of try not to be caught up in the mistake shrapnel, if you will.
I want to go back to something you said. You said the empathy. I'm sorry you made a mistake. Is there a punctuation mark in that sentence, or is that just a flowing sentence there?
There is a punctuation in that, and that you because you can it's not something that is said, it's something that is seen, right? You can actually see when someone has made a mistake and they're acknowledging it to the team. You can actually see sometimes others and the way that they're looking at it, their body language, to just the way that they're talking to their colleague, that they are not mad at them, they're not frustrated, they're actually empathizing, and they may even be trying to find a way to help them fix it. And that is I'd love to see more of that, but I think it really depends on the culture of the organization or the team. Some teams will go to the immediate everyone find your foxhole and jump in because things are going to get ugly here. So I've seen both, and I always obviously appreciate sort of the human-centered side of things when people actually will empathize and try and encourage them that, hey, we can fix this. Hey, as a team, we can work together and solve this problem. Or, hey, we need to acknowledge this problem and figure out how we can avoid doing it again.
John, I remember you sharing a situation like that where you're sitting on a call and someone else is screwed up, and you're just like, I'm going on mute, and
yeah, absolutely, right. And it was so bizarre. Was it truly a mistake? Was it an omission? And it's really curious. Like, Juan, I love when people lean in, right, on the empathy side, but so frequently, like, some of that initial reaction is defensiveness, right? Or, let's deflect. Someone's putting on their jazz hands, right, and try to redirect, blame others. Oh, well, I made this mistake because you didn't give me the right information. Yeah, I did have one owner in particular who just lit up the designer who had an error of omission, and the conversation, the berating, lasted at least 20 minutes of a 30-minute meeting. So I love the good behaviors, but unfortunately there are a lot of poor behaviors out there, where people have difficulty getting past that initial frustration. So it's certainly a challenge that I think we all need some work.
Yeah, it's the total opposite of your example, one of the person who said, okay, we screwed up, so we got to do this and this and this, right? A 20-30 minute berating is it makes you want to roll your eyes and sigh, but there's a lot of us out there who we know those environments at work where if there is something that comes to light, that people are, or you anticipate that people are going to react in a certain way, right? So if you make a mistake, there's a pretty wide ranging set of cultural norms in organizations, right? You can make a mistake individually, and if you can fix it quickly and make it go away, then maybe nothing's going to happen, right? Or in a small group, you can make a mistake, and then, or someone makes a mistake, and you will rally around that person with some empathy and care, and you'll fix it and move things along forward. But there's also teams and groups and even hierarchy that when mistakes are made, the reactions aren't always so positive. And part of that, I think, comes back to the perception of how important is this, right? So, we all want to say that we make mistakes, and then we should do what we need to do to fix the problem, and then we'll learn from it, and we'll do some sort of analysis on it later. It's interesting. It's almost like if you do have a child and they're playing out front, and then they decide to go running full speed into the street of traffic, is that a mistake that you're going to let them make, and then they'll learn from it later, right? I'm not going to take you to the hospital because you won't learn anything. Probably not. Instead, I think, though, there's that's a very clear example of when it's very, there's safety, there's obviously is health and well-being at stake. But we don't always talk about the severity or the impact of the situation before we start seeing other people react or reacting ourselves, right? And so from a business standpoint, right, how do we talk about, when we see, and I say when the three of us see people make mistakes at work, right, how do we react? And how do we make the call on whether or not this mistake is ultra critical, super important, or they can work through it and we'll figure it out?
I think of a couple of things, Kyle. One, we had a breakfast club a couple of months ago, and we talked about this idea of the scalability of mistakes and how some are sort of opportunities to teach or learn. Some of them are opportunities to sort of fix a problem that is common. So a QA/QC thing that can be fixed sort of globally within an organization, and other things that are super impactful. I think somebody used an example of a welder who got hurt on site, ended up losing like fingers or a limb, and the result of that meant he couldn't continue his livelihood. He had to figure out a new way to do things. So they're so scalable. But the thing that became clear is there's a need for some cultural norms in your organization about what it means to make a mistake, and how you either can or cannot share them. If you have the ability to share them through lessons learned or whatever it may be, you start to establish the idea that, hey, you can actually talk about mistakes in a way that we can learn from them and share them. There were other people in this, I remember this breakfast club, that were saying, hey, we actually don't have a culture like that, and we're really sort of cover up, fix it, and hope no one finds out. So the cultural norms around sort of mistakes is fascinating to me. And I think one of the things I learned from my mentor here is he told me a long time ago, run towards mistakes. soon as you see him, head right towards him, acknowledge him, and make sure a lot of people know what's happened, because the sooner you can get people involved in sort of what that mistake is, the sooner you can sort of come to resolution. It's a fascinating dichotomy between maybe a culture of one organization and another, especially if it's two different companies working on a single project. They may approach mistakes and that culture of mistakes in a way different manner.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually have seen a couple of different things even regionally, right, with how different organizations react. So the scalability you mentioned, Juan, in the business sense, how big is the financial impact of a mistake? I observe that as being, even honestly in our own organization, that becomes a factor in how big of a discussion are we going to have? How much reflection do we need to have? And what do we need to do to look at process in order to minimize impact of mistakes or minimize future mistakes of the same type? Mm-hmm. So I think that really all weighs in. For me personally, it really is the voice of experience. I've made so many mistakes, so that as I come through and I'm mentoring people now, I have to go, well, yeah, I did that once, right? Oh, I understand how that goes. The other element for me ends up being, I find mistakes embarrassing because I take ownership for everything I do. Responsibility is really important to me. And so I want everyone who works with me to also have the same level of responsibility and ownership. So if there's someone that I'm responsible for, right, on my team, and then that becomes a team mistake, then, that becomes my challenge of how uncomfortable or embarrassed do I feel in going to the client to say, we made a mistake, or am I changing that language? I made a mistake with my team members. Right. And that has been one of the biggest things that I've had to learn going through the process. But it's all because, I made the mistakes before, so I understand how people feel. And that's really one of the biggest drivers.
Yeah, and that's a huge cultural impact too, right, Jon? If you are not, I would say transparent, but if you are not communicating to your team that I hold myself to this super high standard of not making mistakes, when I do, I really beat myself up when I make mistakes, so I make sure I never happen again. If you don't convey that, then you accidentally or intentionally, depending on, I'm guessing accidentally, you portray that or project that onto all the people that work for you. Right. You have the same expectation because they look up at you, and everything that you do as a leader is mirrored. Right. So if Jon swears, then I need to swear because that's how I get Jon's job. Right. If Jon beats himself up and never makes mistakes or never makes the same mistake twice ever, then I need to hold myself to that exact same standard. Right. They're filling that in because they're looking at you in a position of leadership. So how you process mistakes or how you make them go away or however you go about it, right? They're gonna mirror the same thing. Of course, they're also gonna look around the culture. What do we do here? Right. I know one healthcare organization in the Pacific Northwest that they wanted to adopt a culture of safety. Now that sounds great, right? Culture of safety. How could anyone argue with that? The fact is giving patients the wrong medication is a pretty big, serious issue in the healthcare industry. And so what they wanted to do was not just stop giving patients the wrong medication. They wanted nursing and care providers to say when they almost give a patient the wrong medication. Right? Because if you can capture the almost moments, certainly the system can learn and you can develop processes and procedures to help you eliminate the chances of almost giving the wrong medication. Now, how many nurses do you think jumped up and down and said, sure, I'll tell you all the times I almost screwed up, right? Almost none. So not a surprise. But because there was a fear there that if I say I almost screwed up, right, that's a performance impact. They're going to judge me. They're going to think I'm incompetent, right? All of those things. And so it took I'm talking years of effort by a variety of people to move the culture from one of you're going to get in trouble if you screw up to I want you to share when you almost screw up. right? So have to be very, very cognizant of not just as an individual, what you're portraying your expectations are mistakes, but as a culture, what does the larger organization do in regards to how we go about making mistakes? When we talked through this as a Breakfast Club topic, we had about 6 different things that we identified, 6 different common ways that people go about processing a mistake. So let's take a couple of minutes and share what we learned there. I'll start with you, Juan. There were a couple that you wanted to touch on.
Sure. One of them, the most obvious ones, is sort of acknowledging those mistakes. I spoke to it earlier. When you have an individual, an organization is willing to sort of lean into a mistake and make it, daylight it, make it really clear, I think that there's some power in that. I think of a mistake I made long time ago that made me feel about 1 inch tall. I had to send out some renderings to a city, a planning department. This is back in the days when everything was a hard copy, and I sent them renderings on a board, overnighted them, FedEx, and the colors were wrong, and it was going to a planning commission. And my principal and my project manager at the time saw those things, and it was just a mistake, plain as day. And I could have leaned into it earlier, sooner. And boy, I felt, like I said, I felt about 1 inch tall. Those are the two that really stick to my mind when I think of mistakes. Immediately, those come to my mind.
Well said, John. There were a couple as well that you wanted to share.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the steps we make is apologizing, right? So kind of once you get through that acknowledgement and you kind of beat yourself up, right, then usually we can pause and apologize. And for me, I've learned how to do this. It depends on the level, of course, right, and how you're communicating to the person who is sort of the recipient of the mistake, if you will. And one of the areas I find is sincerity becomes really important. So if someone kind of gives me the offhanded, "Oh, sorry about that," kind of depends on the order of magnitude of mistake, but to me that's not super sincere. I'm like, did you learn anything out of this? How do we make sure that this was you've really reflected on this? So making sure we're conveying how we apologize, that's really important. And then the next step in there really is empathy. How are you empathizing with the other person? And this is really no matter where you are on the spectrum of who's made the mistake. Did you make it? Did someone else make it? But I talked about it a little bit. I've learned, because I've made so many mistakes over the course of my career, that I've been there, I've done it, I understand. I have one client in particular who is stellar at this. She is totally understanding, because as we do work in her hospital, we come across existing conditions. We come across issues all the time. It's usually during the course of construction. We designed something, and now things aren't going the way it was planned. And so we've learned how to have open conversations, but she used to be a designer and she gets it. And she's like, I understand. Let's reflect on it. Let's take care of the problem. Let's make sure that, we don't run into these more often, or we take care of them. And so the empathy piece, that's been a real example for me for how I can handle that with other people.
Well said. A couple other ones that we've touched on so far. One of them is, discussing the fix, the immediate reaction to make it go away. We go into fix it, repair mode, whatever it may be, right? It's not, some people are just naturally uncomfortable having a mistake hanging out there, and letting it run its course, whatever that may be, right? Whether it's a different group of people who are looking to fix it, or it just has to go through some processing and thinking time in order to really find the right solution, right? There's this, we have to make this go away. We can't have something not right hanging out there. And then we also see, I see a lot of leadership over the years who reaction to a situation that happens is, we need to ensure that this never happens again. Right. We had a situation once in a facility where, sprinklers went off in the middle of the night and it ruined a bunch of stuff. And of course the next day it was let's like you were saying, Juan, we'll go about let's fix it. We need to clean up. We need to get that business back in operations. Well, of course, somebody along the line said, what are we going to put in place to ensure that this never happens again? And of course, a number of people are like, "Oh, good question, good question." And my initial reaction was, "Well, we need to burn the place down, because that's the only way for absolute certainty that a mistake like that will never happen again." Now, did I say that? I may have, but no. The point being is that we hear that a lot, and we see a lot of lip service given to those reactions because there is no absolute certainty that a mistake will never happen again, right? But there's something about how that sounds powerful or strong or good leadership when we demand a resolution to prevent a mistake from ever happening again. Well, the reality is we work with people, so mistakes are going to happen all the time, right? And like we've talked about here for this entire conversation, is there's a lot of different reactions. Just like we talk about in all of our podcasts and all of our conversations with Ripple Intent, are you aware in how you react? Are you intentional on how you react? Or are you just defaulting to however it is that you're hardwired, or whatever the cultural situational norm is around you? Are you picking and choosing? Are you being intentional? And then based off of what we shared, are there ones that you naturally do, and which ones do you need to focus on? You've heard from Juan now a couple of times. You've shared, Juan, about the empathy piece around mistakes, right? And how powerful that is. But like we've known through our work in Ripple Intent, empathy is not a common virtue, strength, characteristic. It's not a common ability for so many people, especially in our country, right? We are a get stuff done country, and actually taking time to care about what someone else is going through and being with them as they process through that is not something we do naturally, culturally, what have you. And so when those moments happen, we remember how powerful they are, but also how rare they are. All right.
Yeah, Kyle.
Yeah.
I think as a leader, as I've grown into my role as a leader, you've really learned to sort of assess mistakes in different ways, because sometimes mistakes are truly accidental. Somebody forgot to put in a detail, forgot to add a note, and you use those as teaching, learning. You have some mistakes that are from negligence or laziness, right? And you sort of talk about what that means. And then you have other mistakes that I think, and I feel like this is important, is that some mistakes are adjacent to someone trying a new process or trying to learn or trying to innovate. And you give, as a leader, I think it's important you have to give room for mistakes in those respects, because you want people to be finding new ways and thinking creatively about how to solve problems. And it's super important to kind of step back when you see a mistake and understand, which one of those buckets is it falling in? Is it someone being negligent, someone being just, having a moment where they forgot to do something, or is it someone really trying to do something new and learn something new? That the context matters.
Absolutely. And we talk about a lot too, right? People, 99 out of 100 people are showing up at work trying to do their best. And so the negligent part is pretty rare, right? Mistakes are genuinely mistakes. And so, are you consciously choosing how you react, what you do, and how you impact the other person? Not so much ourselves, but what are we doing in regards to when other people make mistakes? We're almost out of time. So one quick thought, one takeaway for our audience from each of you. I'll start with you, Jon.
Learning how to make this a conversation. I think that's one of the biggest ways to get towards an empathetic approach. That how do we learn how to talk about it, even to understand, hey guys, this is how we as a team want to handle mistakes, because they're going to happen. It's not just about process, it's understanding the people side. And that's one of the best things we can do to build that team cohesion and culture.
Well put. Juan?
I think about the culture of any organization around mistakes, and is it a permissible culture that allows people to make mistakes and then makes them sort of a safe space to make mistakes. I think that's super important. And then if that's the case, as a person in that organization, whether you're a leader or not, do you model that culture? You want to be aligned with sort of the culture of your company if mistakes are acceptable and this is a safe organization to make those mistakes in. I think that is super, super important.
Agreed, 100%. And I would say one thing is that the way you react and process and deal with mistakes is not the way that everybody else around you necessarily reacts, deals with, and processes mistakes. So keep that in mind as you head out into wherever you head out into, and realize that we all make them and we all process them and go through them in a very, very different way. But there are some commonalities, like we talked about today, that you can learn from. So with that, I'm going to say thank you to Juan for joining Jon and I today in the Rip from the Hunt podcast. We appreciate you listening, and we will see you or talk to you on the next one. Take care. Thanks again.